almost missed the special little things this Christmas season because of the move and all. And one of my favorite things each year is getting right into Christmas baking and perfecting my cookie recipes so that I can share them with others but keep a nice cookie jar for our family. But this year, I find my life a little preoccupied with other things for what feels like all of December. Anyone who has moved knows that it's just a bigger ordeal than you can even think. It always seems like a little thing on the onset and it's really exciting, and it really was. But there's a lot of little things involved that I didn't really consider, and so my time has just been a little bit preoccupied. But anyways, this week I was excited to get to some Christmas baking no matter what. Now, I recently listened to an episode on the Simple Farmhouse Podcast where they talked about the health benefits of whole wheat. And it was a no-brainer to me that I had to start incorporating a lot more whole wheat into our baking. So I started making my usual bread loaves right away with whole ground wheat. And I should back it up to say that I already had the red heart wheat berries, which I got a big supply of to keep a stockpile a few months ago in case we had an emergency. So I already had that. And then a sweet lady in our church gave me her flour mill, which she was no longer using, no longer really baking any bread, and she knew that I loved to make bread, and so she gifted me this really beautiful flour mill. Such a sweet gift to our family, and so I already had the equipment and the wheat berries to get going on this process right away. The reason I was making sourdough bread was to feed my family wholesome, healthy food, and so it only made sense that I should be having the rest of the nutrients of the whole wheat in there. So that's a long tangent, but with my plan to bake bread for our friends and neighbors for Christmas gifts, I had to perfect a recipe that wouldn't scare everyone's taste buds. So this is a few days of baking. I tried out 3 different bread recipes with almost entirely whole wheat. First, I tried Mrs. Becker's recipe. She was the lady from the podcast, with whole wheat and water, starting that to autolyze. And then after a few minutes, I added the yeast, oil, honey, and salt. My yeast comes from a giant pack that needs water to hydrate first before I add it to my bread mix. So just in case you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm just hydrating my yeast before I add it to my mix. I let the bread sit out to double in size for the rest of the day, and then I popped it into the fridge since I didn't have any energy to finish baking that night. I also mixed another recipe that day, this time with flour, water, sourdough, salt, and a little bit of yeast. This mix I also let sit overnight in the fridge after doubling in size on my countertop. The next morning, I lined my bowls with dish towels and flour, and then I shaped my many loaves. As we near winter solstice, the days have been dark and dreary. It makes me think about how much we need the light, which is a great thought to have around Christmas time, and how much we really need light in this world. And light has come indeed. I'm still getting acquainted with my kitchen. The table in here happened by accident, but it's working really well as an island, and I think I'm going to keep it right here. And this will also be my first time testing out this oven and seeing how many loaves I can bake at once. I only recently noticed that I only have one oven rack, so I'll be browsing Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist to find another one really soon. But with some balancing, I was able to preheat 4 loaf pans and 2 Dutch ovens to bake in. I really should find a way to rest my bread loaves in rectangle containers and not in these circle bowls, because when I bake in these bread pans, they always turn out not as great because the loaves haven't really had a chance to rest or kind of relax in this rectangular shape, so they're never as good as they could be. But I do put my dough into the pans while they're piping hot, so I can't really rest them in there and still get them super hot so that it doesn't stick to the pan. If you make the pans really hot, then the dough doesn't stick to it. So that's sort of the most important thing for me. So I think I'll just get some extra baking pans. That may be the cheapest way to just get the proofing done in those and then transfer them into the piping hot pans for sandwich loaves. I'm starting to lean a little bit more toward the baking pans versus the Dutch oven. I love the Dutch oven, but you really have to be so in tune with your sourdough to really get a good rise and make an impressive loaf, whereas I find if I'm just baking in these bread pans, it always rises pretty well, and I think it's just a smaller container which just helps that process along. So my bread's baked, I found a winner recipe, and it should be no surprise that my sourdough loaves stood out above the rest. I hope to learn more about sourdough and whole wheat and how this all works together and why that was in the coming weeks. Thankfully, these breads cooled just in time for me to fiddle with some wrapping just before my friends rang the doorbell and I had to give this bread away. I had these leftover checkered basket liners from our son's birthday party that I wrapped these breads in with some string and of course a little bit of greenery just to tie it all together. When the guests left, I carried on with my Christmas baking. It's a tradition to make my grandma's sweet cookies, which I call gingerbread cookies on my website because they totally taste like soft gingerbread cookies to me. And I'm going to try this year to make them with whole wheat. This is an experiment to see what the texture will be like and how they'll taste. I only made a third of the batch because the recipe yields 4 dozen cookies and I want to make some tweaks before I make the whole load. I start by grating an orange rind and then mixing the dry ingredients together. The sugar isn't on this film, but it did make it in there. Then I add the grated orange rind, mix that all together. I melt butter in a different bowl so that I can slightly rub it into the flour mix with my fingers. Next, mix together eggs and milk in another bowl and then add that to the flour mix. Finally, mix everything together, and this is where I add extra milk or flour depending on what the dough feels like with the whole wheat flour. And if you don't know what to feel for, of course you want some kind of dough that's going to be able to stick together so that you can make little balls and put them on baking pans. And then I roll them into balls, press them down with a fork, and bake for 20 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Now here's the truth. It's worth figuring out this whole wheat thing for our baked goods because I really believe it's healthier for us. Having that whole grain in all the things we eat somehow just makes sense that God intended for this whole wheat germ to be eaten the way it was given. The turnout wasn't that bad. Sure, it was a little bit gritty. I need to grind my flour a whole lot finer, so I can be experimenting here a little bit more. I can also source a different kind of wheat berry. I think in the States they have something like a hard white wheat berry, so I'll have to see what we can source that is similar to that. Right now all I can get are spring hard red wheat berries, so I'm on the hunt for something that's a little bit softer. Finally, I think we just need to adjust our taste buds. Like I said, I haven't really known whole wheat my entire life, so it's a whole new taste, and I'm sure it's a newer taste for a lot of our culture as well. And then really, after a few bites, it tastes great, especially with the chocolate chip cookies. When that chocolate hits you, it doesn't really matter. The rest kind of just your brain catches up with what you're eating. I think we can train our taste buds to really enjoy anything if we want to set our minds to it. So, this is a path worth pursuing in my opinion. I also tried our usual chalk chip cookie recipe before I milled the flour finer, so it was also a little gritty. But I have the same findings. It tastes really good. The chocolate chips make all the difference and really kind of distract your mind from the grittiness and the whole wheatiness. So definitely something I will continue to experiment with as I grind this wheat finer. For our chocolate chip recipe, I mix the sugar and butter together. And then in a different bowl, I mix all of the dry ingredients together. Then I combine the wet and the dry. Finally, at the end, I stir in the chocolate chips, bake that for 10 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I take it out to cool for another 10 minutes. No, seriously, really, I let it cool, I walk away, I totally forget about it. That's the best way to get these cookies to hold their shape and stay soft. There is my Christmas baking. I'm sure I'll be doing more this week, continuing my tests with whole grains in baking, as well as some delicious duck and beef tongue for Christmas dinners. So stay tuned. Until next video, cheers.